If Death Knights were to have a fourth spec, I'd like to see a Necromancer spec. When I first heard about Death Knights as a class and their ability to control the undead, I expected them to do it on a larger scale. I mean, yeah, sure they have Army of the Dead, but I expected consistent control of several undead minions. The core of this spec would be based around minion control as a ranged DPS. A Necromancer would have control of up to 4 persistent minions at a time. They would deal damage primarily by empowering and commanding their minions. Melee-based abilities such as Blood Strike, Death Strike, Soul Reaper, and Necrotic Strike would be removed for the spec. Blood Boil, Pestilence, and Outbreak could all be pruned as well. Diseases would not be applied directly to enemy targets. Instead, the Necromancer would empower minions with diseases, so Icy Touch and Plague Strike would each be replaced with a disease empowerment cast on a minion. Each minion could only carry one empowerment. There would be Icy Empowerment, which would cause the minion to apply Frost Fever to targets it attacks. Plague Empowerment, allowing the select minion to apply Blood Plague. Blood Empowerment, which would cause the minion to heal the Death Knight with each attack. And lastly, Death Empowerment, which would cause the minion to apply an effect similar to Necrotic Strike. Once a minion was empowered, it would keep the empowerment until death. Killing off minions would be intentional, with Explode. Exploding a minion would apply an AoE effect based on its type. Icy and Plague Empowerments would apply their respective diseases. Blood Empowerment would provide a burst of healing to nearby party and raid members, and Death Empowerment would apply a necrotic attack. Outside of combat, 4 minions could be summoned at a time on a cooldown. New minions could be summoned in combat for 50 runic power. Minion damage would account for the majority of the Necromancer's damage, however they would need some other spells in between managing their minions. Bone Spear would consume blood and unholy runes for a primary cast time spell. Ice Spike would be cast under the target, erupting after a few seconds, impaling the targets that fail to move. Death Coil would serve as a runic power dump, however using Explode and then summoning another minion would be the best way to use runic power. A Necromancer's Mastery would be a simple increase to minion damage. A new presence could be introduced, focusing on minion damage overall. For cooldowns, the Necromancer could have access to the standard Empowered Rune Weapon and Army of the Dead. And for a new cooldown, Incite Frenzy, a significant attack and movement speed boost for controlled minions. The talents for Death Knights would need to be altered slightly to make the Necromancer spec available. I wouldn't make any changes to the last 3 tiers. I think they are very well designed and could work fine with a ranged DPS. Now if your main character is a Death Knight, you might want to look away as I butcher your first 3 talent tiers. For starters, I would bake Rolling Blood into the Blood and Unholy specs, and Plague Leech into the Frost spec, tossing out Unholy Blight entirely. From there I would drop Death's Advance down to the first tier, and have a new ability to take its place. Wall of Bones would be a destructible and impassable line of sight object, which both friends and allies could attack. The line of sight would restrict not only enemies but allies as well, so positioning would be crucial. This is similar to what I had in mind for the 4th spec Paladin, but with some significant differences. The 3rd tier would then be all about crowd control in one form or another. Going back to the 1st tier, I would add 2 new movement speed altering effects, Unwavering Resolve and Anchored Grip. In the 2nd tier, I would bake Purgatory into the class, and replace it with a new ability, Anti-Magic Affinity. I'd also go ahead and make Anti-Magic Zone a lot more powerful. Intellect Plate would have another place to go as well. And if my 4th spec Paladin was also implemented, that would bring the spec count up to 3 for using Intellect Plate. So that's my take on a 4th spec for Death Knights. It would provide a solid range DPS option and a very unique playstyle.